Okay, so you're a developer, right? And you're just swimming in this sea of new AI tools for coding. It's a lot.
It really is.
Yeah,
Every day something new pops up.
exactly. And you need to know, like, what actually works and maybe more importantly, what are they doing with your code?
Yeah, the privacy question is huge.
So forget scrolling endlessly. Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
We basically take all this info and boil it down to what you really need. Fast.
And today we are zeroing in on 3 tools getting a lot of buzz. GitHub Copilot, Cursor.ai, and Windsurf, that's part of Codeium.
Right. We found this really great article comparing them head to head.
Yeah, it lays things out nicely. So our mission, if you will, is pretty clear. Give you the essentials on what they do, the privacy angles, which are critical, and also, what if you're still learning? How do these tools fit in?
No fluff, just the core stuff you need to know. Sound good?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with probably the one most people have tried first, GitHub Copilot.
Yeah, definitely the most well-known entry point for many.
It's that AI helper that just sort of lives inside your editor, like VS Code, JetBrains, whatever you use.
Exactly, it's a plugin.
Yeah.
And its big strength is that wide compatibility. It supports, well, tons of languages and frameworks.
So how does it actually, work? It's not just magic, right?
No, not magic. Though sometimes it feels like it. It uses a whole suite of large language models, things like OpenAI's models 4.0, oh 01, the mini one, oh 03 mini. Then there's Claude, versions 3.5, 3.7, even a thinking variant. And Google's Gemini 2.0 Flash 2.
Wow, quite a lineup.
Yeah, they've got options. And these models are trained on just massive amounts of code. They look at what you're typing, the context, and try to predict what comes next. Generate suggestions.
Okay, so I can see how that'd be super helpful for like the boring stuff, writing tests maybe, or refactoring code.
Absolutely. The article really highlights that. For
Yep.
writing repetitive tests, big time saver. Lets you focus on the tricky logic.
Yeah, I hate writing boilerplate tests.
Nobody loves it. And for refactoring, yeah, it can handle a lot of the standard transformations. But there's a catch the article mentions.
Yeah.
When you get into really complex, like production applications, the suggestions can get noisy, sometimes less helpful, maybe even distracting, even if you give it more context.
Okay, good to know. Which brings us to the big one. Privacy. My code. What's happening with it? It needs access, right?
It absolutely needs access to work well. And yeah, that's the core privacy question. How does it handle your data?
So what does the article say? Where does the code go?
Okay, so when you use Copilot, it sends context information about your code, the files open, that sort of thing, to GitHub servers, which run on Azure. And it also sends data about how you interact with it, like
Ah.
accepting or rejecting suggestions.
Right. Is it secure, like during that transfer and when it's stored?
They say yes. The article mentions industry standard encryption is used, both when the data is moving and when it's stored. And they're pretty clear about the types of data they collect. User interaction metrics, the inputs you give it, the AI's responses, and any feedback you provide.
Okay, encrypted standard stuff. But here's something interesting is like the article pointed out a difference in how they use that data for training, depending on who you are.
Yes, this is really key. GitHub has a very explicit policy. If you're a Copilot business or enterprise customer, your code data is not used to train their AI models, period.
That's a pretty strong guarantee for companies. Makes sense.
Definitely addresses a major enterprise concern.
But what about us regular folks, individual developers? The article seemed a bit less clear there.
That's a fair reading. While the business and enterprise data is walled off from training, the article indicates that for individual users, your coding activity and interactions are monitored and stored,
For what purpose then?
primarily to improve the service overall and to personalize your suggestions. So while your specific secret sauce might not be directly training the next Copilot model on an individual plan, how you use it does feed back into the system's general intelligence.
Okay, so it's contributing, just not directly training on the code itself, perhaps. Still, something to be aware of. They seem serious about security overall, though. Lots of certifications mentioned.
Oh yeah, very serious. The article lists SOC 1, 2, and 3, ISO 27001, CSA Star Level 2 for cloud security, even TISAX, which is big in the auto industry. They've definitely put effort into getting those validations.
So summing up Copilot on privacy, strong security measures, clear line drawn for business data not being used for training, but individual user data is used for service improvement. Worth thinking about.
That's a good summary. Now let's shift gears. Cursor.ai.
Right, this one's different. Not a plugin, it's the whole editor, isn't it? Built around AI.
Exactly. The article describes it as a modified version, a fork, of VS Code, but with AI deeply baked in from the start.
Which probably means the AI feels more integrated, less bolted on.
That's the idea. When you're using Cursor, your code and context get processed by models from, again, several big names, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google. Having access to multiple models allows for these more deeply integrated features.
Like what? What makes it stand out?
Well, the article mentions things like generating code straight from natural language prompts,
Hmm.
having a chat assistant right there that understands your context, and just generally a better grasp of the entire code base.
And they have that code base indexing thing. Sounds important for context.
It is. It basically creates semantic representations of your code, like an AI map of your project, understanding how different parts connect.
So it knows more than just the file you're currently editing.
Precisely. The goal is more relevant, more accurate AI help. It's on by default, but you can turn it off.
Hmm.
And crucially, the article notes these index representations are encrypted and file paths are obfuscated, for extra protection.
That's good. And I saw you can add project roles in a special file.
Yeah, in .cursor rules. You can define specific guidelines for your project, maybe based on style guides, like Thoughtbot's examples they mentioned. Helps tailor the AI's suggestions to your team's way of doing things.
The author mentioned whipping up a mobile app prototype really fast with it, even without much React Native experience. That sounds pretty powerful.
It really does speak to the potential. For quickly getting something off the ground, especially in an unfamiliar stack,
Hmm.
that deep integration seems to lower the barrier significantly. Analyzing multiple files seems key there.
Okay, but privacy again. If it's so integrated, where's my code going this time?
Right. So Cursor has SOC2 Type 2 certification, and they do annual penetration tests.
Mhm.
Good security baseline stuff. But the data flow, as the article lays out, involves multiple stops.
Like,
Your code data travels through cloud providers like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, but also potentially through AI providers like Fireworks, OpenAI, Anthropic, and others they partner with.
that sounds like a few different places it could potentially end up.
It's definitely a multi-step journey. However, a really important point the article makes is that Cursor has zero data retention agreements with several of these AI providers,
Meaning?
meaning those providers are contractually obligated not to store your code after they've processed it to generate a response. It should just pass through.
Okay, that's a significant commitment. Are there other controls in Cursor itself?
Yes, quite a few. There's a privacy mode that stops code being stored even on Cursor's own servers, though it still gets processed for the AI features. You can use .cursor ignore files to tell it hands off specific files or folders.
Like .jet ignore, but for the AI.
Exactly, and you can delete your account and associated data. They also mention server locations, US, Tokyo, London for data residency needs. And that privacy mode, it's automatically turned on for teams using Cursor.
So Cursor seems to offer more direct user control over privacy mode, ignore files, zero retention agreements. Interesting contrast. Now, Windsurf, part of Codeium. The article said it's kind of similar to Cursor.
That's the initial vibe, yeah. Another cloud-based editor, AI built in. And like Cursor, it taps into a bunch of models. GPT-4o, the Claude family again, 3.5, 3.7 Sonnet, even a thinking version. Gemini 2.0 Flash and 2.5 Pro, DeepSeek models, and something called Cascade Base.
Cascade Base, what's special about that one?
The article mentioned it specifically powers their agentic code generation.
Agentic meaning.
Think like.
Yeah.
More autonomous AI. The article gave an example where you could just type continue in the chat, and Windsurf would try to figure out the next logical code block and write it. Kind of proactive.
Interesting. Did it work well?
The author's take was that the actual results, the code generated, and the context awareness felt pretty similar to using the chat features in Cursor, honestly.
Okay. But Windsurf had that other feature, MCP Model Context Protocol. That sounded potentially huge.
Yeah, MCP is definitely intriguing. It allows Windsurf to pull context from lots of different places at the same time.
Like what sort of places?
The local code, obviously, but also potentially web documentation, internal company wikis, private knowledge bases, all feeding into the AI's understanding through this protocol.
Wow, okay. That could give the AI way more context for complex problems, but connecting to all that stuff must raise some privacy flags, right? More data pathways.
Absolutely. That's the trade-off the article points out. More power, potentially more complex data flow, and thus more privacy considerations you need to think about.
So how does Windsurf, or Codeium rather, handle privacy overall?
It follows Codeium's approach. A big feature is their zero data retention mode. This is actually the default for teams and enterprise customers.
Similar promise to Cursor, then don't store the code in plain text.
Right, but again, important reminder, The code still has to be sent to Codeium servers to be processed by the AI models. The zero retention applies after processing.
And they also use third-party AI providers like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google Cloud.
They do. And Codeium states they have zero retention agreements with them too. But, like with Cursor, you're relying on those third parties sticking to those agreements.
Makes sense. How about Windsurf's security credentials?
Pretty strong. SOC2 Type 2 annual pen tests, similar to Cursor, but they also highlight FedRAMP High accreditation.
FedRAMP High, that's significant, isn't it? Especially for government or highly regulated industries.
Exactly. It's a major plus if you operate in those spaces.
And data residency. Where does Windsurf run?
They specify US, EU, specifically Germany, and dedicated FedRAMP environments. They emphasize clear controls to keep data within those regions. And they also mention having separate infrastructure for handling requests in that zero data retention privacy mode, further isolating them.
Okay, so looking across all three, Copilot, Cursor, Windsurf. Security is clearly a big deal for all of them, but they tackle it a bit differently.
That's a really good way to put it. Copilot seems to lead with the sheer number of third-party security gadgets, but the core difference feels like control and transparency. Well, Copilot keeps the processing mostly within GitHub's cloud, maybe with less granular detail about individual user data handling specifics. Cursor and Windsurf, on the other hand, emphasize user controls like privacy mode and zero retention, but require sending code to their infrastructure, which relies on agreements with their AI partners.
Which circles back to that fundamental question the article posed.
Yeah.
How okay are you, personally or as an organization, with your proprietary code being processed, even temporarily, by systems outside your direct control?
That's the million-dollar question, really. And it's not just about features, it's about trust and risk assessment.
And tied into this is the whole learning aspect. If you're just starting out, these tools are tempting, maybe too tempting.
Yeah, the article had some really good advice there. It's crucial to see these AI tools as assistants, right? Not as like a replacement for your own brain.
Don't just hit generate for everything.
Exactly. The recommendation was solid. Try to solve the problem yourself first. Wrestle with it. Then, after you have your own solution, look at what the AI suggests.
Use it for comparison to see other ways.
Precisely. It's a fantastic way to learn different approaches, maybe more efficient patterns you hadn't thought of, but you need that initial struggle.
It also suggested using AI to explain things you don't get, or if you're truly properly stuck, like a tutor on demand.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Get clarification, get unstuck. But avoid the trap of just having it write every tricky bit of code for you.
Because you won't actually learn it that way.
You won't. The article really stressed balancing the convenience, which is undeniable, with deliberate practice. You still need to build those mental muscles yourself through hands-on coding.
Because being a good programmer isn't just about churning out lines of code, right? It's about problem solving, understanding the fundamentals.
That's the core of it. Those fundamental skills, the problem-solving mindset, that comes from practice, from figuring things out yourself, not just from clicking accept suggestion.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, we looked at GitHub Copilot, widely used plugin, strong on security certs, but maybe less clear on individual data use beyond improving the service itself.
Then Cursor.ai, the integrated editor, lots of user privacy controls like privacy mode and zero retention focus with its partners.
And Windsurf, also integrated, similar privacy promises, plus that powerful MCP context idea, but bringing its own data flow points to consider, alongside strong security like FedRAMP High.
And for each one, the choice really comes down to you, the listener. What are your needs? What features matter most? And critically, what's your comfort level with how your data is handled?
There's no single right answer, is there? It's a trade-off.
It really is. Which leads us to maybe the final thought to leave you with.
Yeah.
How is all this AI integration going to fundamentally change how developers actually learn to code and solve problems in, the longer term? That's something we're probably only beginning to figure out.
A huge question. Definitely something I'm all over. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.